Well, it doesn't say at my end, but I hope it does at yours.
Well, we are recording now. We should be. So I'm with Professor Bill Bowring, who was going to be the first speaker at my human rights conference this year, about now, May. That was all cancelled, of course, because of the virus. The virus is having incredible implications as far as human rights is concerned, potentially. But Bill Bowring was here 25 years ago, speaking at my 50th anniversary liberation presentation on human rights. He's got 25 more years of experience to tell us about, and he's got a huge knowledge. And I don't know how long it'll take us to get it out of his head, but what's the most important things that are going on now with human rights, Bill? Where's the key elements?
Well, I think where we are in the United Kingdom is the determination of the present government to take us out of the European system for protection of human rights, which I think is very ironical considering that the founder of the Council of Europe and the main force behind the convention was Winston Churchill. Right. And his motivation was, first of all, solidarity in the Cold War, but secondly, his motivation was to stop socialism in Britain.
Right.
And there's a very good book came out a year ago called The Conservative Human Rights Revolution. And the picture on the front is Winston Churchill addressing a large crowd, I think in Brussels. So it's very ironical indeed. And we were actually the first country in 2005 to defy the European Court of Human Rights and refuse to obey a judgment. Since then, our example was followed by Russia and some other countries. But I think that in Britain, that is the main question. And of course, Johnson is promising a constitutional convention. And the first task of it will be to stop the courts having the judicial review powers that they have now to review government. But I'm sure in the background also will be the question of the European Convention on Human Rights.
Right. If you can get your head up a little more the middle of my frame, it looks more picturesque. That's better. That's it. The strange thing is about revoking the convention, the European Convention, is that it doesn't necessarily get revoked in Jersey at the same time. This is a rather interesting fact that came up that the former bailiff here, Bailiff Balash, who became a senator in the States, he came back one day, he was the external affairs minister here for a while, he came back one day and saying that he didn't want it to be revoked as far as Jersey was concerned. Right. Of course, the United Kingdom is the high contracting party for it, so they'd have to revoke it here as well. So they could find themselves in a little constitutional clash if there was a move still to resist it. So constitutionally, these things are a little bit odd. Whether it would get revoked here, it's not automatic, but with the current government here, rather weak government we got here now, it probably would be revoked by some means or other. So what goes on in the UK isn't inevitably followed here, but they tend to follow it if it suits them. So, I mean, it's also, I mean, for example, they're quite progressive here on occasions. They've just banned smacking of children here, and they're very proud of that fact. They're leading the world. And of course, there's a history to that, of course, because one of the first cases against corporal punishment was the Alaman case, Tyrol or something, back in the...
It was a case called Tyrer, T-Y-R-E-R.
Tyrer, right. Now, that was the sort of the start of a process, and then execution, capital punishment as such got banned. It's still some countries do it, of course, but there's a process going on. But the thing is, people don't look at the human rights implications of these sorts of decisions. They just say, well, that's fair, that's not fair, this is, you know. They don't really read into it. They don't say, well, what article is that? This is what this is the problem. I don't know whether they do in the UK. Do they? People say, oh, well, if smacking was banned in the UK, it hasn't been yet. I think Scotland was looking at it, maybe.
Oh, well, I mean, it's been banned, of course, but I mean, so far as the European Convention on Human Rights is concerned, most people think it's part of the EU.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and so because the EU is a great devil and demon, and we have to escape from it, then Strasbourg and the European Court of Human Rights are part of the same thing.
Exactly.
And you will find that even in serious newspapers like the Daily Telegraph.
Now, of course, even
though it's a totally different organization.
They are indeed. But of course, Jersey, in fact, is not even part of the European Union, or wasn't. No. It has this strange Protocol 3 status.
Yes.
Of course, they say it's wonderful or it's bad or whatever it is. So what its future role will be, again, it'll be determined in the United Kingdom because we're not a national state. We're not a sovereign state. We don't do our own negotiating. The UK will do all that. So we will get handed down something. What it'll be, we don't know. But they think as far as finance is concerned, it's going to be a jamboree. If there is ever a jamboree again after virus, we don't know.
Exactly.
But these sort of cases you just said, how many cases have you taken to the court at Strasbourg?
50 or 60.
50 or 60.
Yeah.
And what sort of personal issues are involved? What level of challenge is it to government?
Well, as I say, the cases I took during the 1990s, a lot of cases were against Turkey on behalf of Kurds. And then, of course, Putin became Prime Minister of Russia in 1999 and started the Second Chechen War. And Russia had just ratified the European Convention on Human Rights the year previous. And so we started taking cases against Russia on behalf of Chechens. And as I say, I got €1 million from the European Commission to set up a project. And we started in 2000, and we're still going strong, many cases. And I have other cases as well. Probably the highest profile case I have is on behalf of the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, who was murdered with radioactive poison in London. And so I'm taking her case, and we're now waiting for a judgment. Of course, we were held up by the public inquiry in London with Sir Robert Owen, but I'm representing the widow in that case.
Now, your representation is out of the English system. It's into Strasbourg, is that what it is?
Strasbourg, yeah.
Right.
And actually, at the beginning of that case, I was because I'm not a QC, I'm a barrister, and I was being led by Keir Starmer QC,
right,
who's now the leader of the Labour Party.
Right.
So I know him very well.
Good. You're confident he's the man, are you? You think he's the...
Oh, if you watch Parliament yesterday, where he took Johnson apart
Did he?
In a manner which must have been very painful for Johnson.
Yeah. Well, I don't understand
what happens when you have a top QC, former chief prosecutor, as the leader of the opposition. Yeah.
I don't understand what holds Johnson together. I mean, he's just a windbag. I just don't get it. But there we are. He's survived, hasn't he?
Well, this is his magic, isn't it? That his image is a kind of bumbling incompetent.
That's right.
Who cracks jokes.
Yeah. But it's the power behind the throne. Obviously, there's powerful forces behind him, aren't there? There must be holding it all together. There must be
a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot of money. Now, this lady, I know she's a big public figure. Have you ever represented anybody in Jersey? A case to Strasbourg?
Not Strasbourg. As I said, I was very recently the expert witness in a case in the Royal Court of Jersey, the Samedi division. So I didn't have to come to the court in the end. It was simply my written evidence. But we won. And this was against the huge Russian aluminium company, Rusal, which up until now is still domiciled in Jersey, though they're being forced to re-domicile to part of the Russian Federation now. So Jersey is full of these foreign entities, of course, who domicile in Jersey for tax reasons.
Yeah. They seem to be, these big organizations, they seem to troll the courts of the world looking for the decision they want because they got the money to be able to afford that.
Well, this one they lost. Yeah. This one they lost.
Because I went in the court the other day, there was a case going on which I knew nothing about, and I thought it was a Russian case. They sounded like Russian names. So I appeared in the court, or stood there in the public part, and they nudged the two Jorats and the bailiff, or deputy bailiff, whatever he was, commissioner, and she nudged him, and they looked at me, and they said, "Is this a public hearing or a private hearing?" Right. So the two lawyers representing, they had a discussion in court. One wanted it to be public, one wanted it to be private. So then they adjourned, came back and said, "This is a private hearing. You'll have to leave, Mr. Dunn." So I had to leave. But then I had no idea what the case was about. It was about huge trust sums, because I looked it up later. Now that's a case that's been in the public eye for years in various formats. It's been to the Privy Council, it's been to the Guernsey courts. And there was a couple of characters, they were Iranians, multi-billion-pound cases going all around. You'll have encountered them. I can't even remember their name offhand, but it sounds like Russian names. And that's what's going on. And the public here knows nothing about it. Now, I don't know who the lawyers were. I've got a clue. But I expect they would have had someone in the background, somebody like you employed to give legal opinion, to give knowledge. But the public here learns nothing. Now, this is where the human rights battle, if they are going on in Jersey and Guernsey, this is where it's all about, the commercial world. This is where it is.
Yes, I do a certain amount of expert work in commercial cases, and it's very interesting. But the majority of the work is at Strasbourg, and in relation in particular to Russia. But I'm also quite often an expert witness in asylum appeals and extradition cases.
Right.
So that's my sideline in addition to teaching.
That used to be a sort of discretion for the Lieutenant Governor here, but they've taken it away from the Lieutenant Governor to decide on extradition. They had a couple of embarrassing cases, I think.
Right.
So they've brought it back to a government department now to decides all that. But basically, I don't know, but I suspect that the UK has a big say in those cases.
Well, I did the first one in Scotland 2 years ago. It was their first Russian extradition request. And I was in front of not a judge, but a sheriff, who is addressed in Scotland as my lord.
Oh, really? Yeah. Right.
Completely different legal system in Scotland.
Yes. How do you adapt to that sort of thing? Because obviously, if you came, you couldn't appear in the Jersey court because you're not a Jersey lawyer. So it's.
Well, I was appearing as an expert.
You'd appear as an expert, right? Okay.
So I did what I was told by the Scottish lawyers.
Right. I see. The business of human rights. I mean, is it? Because I used to go to human rights seminars in the UK before it became incorporated into Jersey law, the English law, before the Human Rights Act came in. And I used to understand what they were talking about. And then it became law, a usable law. And lawyers then, they started to talk into a language which I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. Because it was something.
This is how lawyers protect their profession, isn't it? It's like doctors.
That's right. So I've been mesmerized and just totally confused by what's supposed to be happening. Jersey's just ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But how it's to be enforced, if somebody's child is being denied their human rights, how they do it. You've got a children's commissioner who is now speaking on their behalf. You've got a children's rights officer who is also supposedly speaking. We've got a children's minister, and we've got every states member has an obligation, a pledge they've signed to look after children, because they have as you will know, there was a huge abuse inquiry went on here, costing 25 million with English QC, leading it went on for years, still going on really. But how does the ordinary Joe effectively apply human rights to their own cases? I mean, you've got these guys, Kurds, presumably these are poor people generally, aren't they? Where do they get resources? Do they depend upon somebody having a charitable activity like you? Are you a charity for them?
Yes, I do this work free of charge, as do most people. But in order to, of course, take a case to Strasbourg, you've got to have gone all the way through your own local courts. And so the problem, of course, in England is that the law is extremely expensive.
Right.
And so the cases that get to Strasbourg from ordinary people have usually got there because they've been represented by Liberty, which is, as you know, a wonderful organization that's been going since the 1930s. And so Liberty is dedicated to taking the cases of people. And then there are other For example, Justice, which is an organization in Britain, and it's part of the International Commission of Jurists all over the world. The senior human rights lawyer there is my former student. And I have several former students in Amnesty International, but also there's something called the AIR Center, Advice on Individual Rights in Europe. And they also help people take cases.
They organised the conference years ago, and they got a guy who's now a QC who came along there. He was still, I don't know, he was a young barrister then. He's still very active.
Yeah.
We're on the edge here. We're not within. They have very seldom have they got funds to come here. They won't look because we're outside the jurisdiction. We're not.
Yeah. So I think the lawyers who've been working on the case I was telling you about, the poisoning of Litvinenko,
Right.
Keir Starmer, and now it's a QC called Ben Emerson, a barrister called Maya Sikand,
right.
And we're all working free of charge.
Right. That's not fair, though, is it?
Well, it's how it is, and the way I look at it, so I really don't see human rights as a religion, and I think that's the wrong way to look at it. But what I do think is that since the Second World War, we now have some judicial mechanisms. There is a place to which you can take complaints, and there is a certain level of compliance by governments. So it's worth doing, even though it's so slow. And so as a lawyer, so I have these skills, and I think that's a useful thing I can be doing.
No names, but do you get many Jersey students pass through Birkbeck College?
I'm sorry?
Do you get many Jersey students pass through?
Birkbeck, it's evening education.
Right.
And so all of the undergraduates are working Londoners.
Right.
So the great majority have black or brown skins, of course, which is London.
Right.
And so they're all working during the day and studying in the evening. And the undergraduates are aged between 25 and 95.
Really? Oh,
the human rights program is very popular.
Right.
And then I teach a human rights masters, which is students from all over the world, so every continent. And I have about 50 students. And so next October, I'll be teaching a course on how you take a case to the European Court of Human Rights.
That would be fascinating.
Quite a popular, and I teach that with the AIR Center.
Right.
So they come in and we work on a live case.
Perhaps
so students have a go at some drafting.
Perhaps you can link that series to the Institute of Law in Jersey, because they are trying to do their best. They have got, there never used to be any legal education here at all, but now they've got the Institute. It's all frozen, like Birkbeck is all frozen at the moment. Hopefully it'll open its doors again. But maybe somebody would say to you, would you like to link a course like that to us? Because obviously people's eyes have been opened to the potential of Skype and Zoom and his friends, if they can know how to work it, rather not like me. It's got huge potential, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't have to be here. You don't have to be on a salary. You can be paid a £50 fee, and you'll do anything, I should think, wouldn't you? If you get nothing from representing these celebrities around the world, I should think £50 would be a huge amount of money, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So, where's it going? Where are we going with human rights? Can you give me some optimism?
I think one big optimism, for example, is that last year everybody was quite certain that Russia was either going to leave the European system or was going to be thrown out. And that has not happened at all, as a matter of fact. So, there's been a bit of a dirty stitch up between the European Court of Human Rights and the Russian authorities, but Russia is still in there, and that's many, many cases. And certainly for ordinary Russians, it's the only avenue they can take to get, and quite often Russia does comply, so it's the only real opportunity they have to take a case outside of the Russian courts and with the possibility of winning. So I think it's extremely important. A huge number of cases come from Russia.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm amazed that they're allowing it to happen at all. You'd think they'd find some device that you couldn't take the case outside the country or something. The device, but obviously that's the system.
I think Putin would like to do that.
Would he?
And of course, Russia's joining the Council of Europe and ratifying the convention.
Right.
That was down to Boris Yeltsin,
Right.
who was a very different character from Putin. I mean, not least that Yeltsin was a very famous heavy drinker, whereas, of course, Putin is teetotal.
Oh, is he? I didn't realize that. Oh, I see. We've got in Jersey, we've got a lot of Polish and Romanians and Portuguese.
Yeah.
I don't hear many cases from those countries. Presumably there are cases. Are they going?
Oh, many cases. So, I mean, the Council of Europe is 47 countries.
Right.
And it's 850 million people.
Right.
And so, this is, it's grotesquely underfunded, but you have got 47 judges in Strasbourg, one from each country. Right. And they do hear a huge number of cases. And as I say, even Russia complies 98% of the time.
It's amazing, isn't it? I want to talk to you all day, but I know you've got other things to do, presumably. But I'm fascinated by this process. Little jurisdictions like Jersey, the bureaucracy that goes with all this.
Yeah.
Can they possibly really take part? Can they be human rights compliant on things? Because who's going to be the expert here to advise them? They're like the Attorney General, but they had a debate this week in the States about the virus, and they were looking at implications. And the Attorney General stands up and says, well, it's human rights compliant. And they mean, basically, it's the Convention of Human Rights. He referred to the Children's Convention because they've just signed that. But that's the limit of it. Now, one of the great questions is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has been around since just after the war. If you cite that in a court here, they say, well, that's not the law of Jersey.
No, the thing is, actually, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that isn't a binding treaty, in fact.
Right.
That is a declaration of the states of the United Nations. So technically speaking, it is treated as being customary international law,
right?
Which means that even in Jersey, it is the law, as a matter of fact, and you need a decent lawyer to go along and say, this is actually the binding law.
Really?
Binding on every country, including...
Is that argument ever used? Is that used anywhere? Do people say
it is? Not very often, but it is. And it's a good legal argument.
Because following on from the Universal Declaration, of course, there are the covenants, economic, social, and cultural.
And the covenants, two covenants.
Right.
So and they are binding treaties.
Right.
And you can take complaints under the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Mm-hmm. Britain has not ratified the first optional protocol, which would enable people to take complaints. Right. Russia has.
Russia has.
Most countries in the world have. Britain is the outsider. So we don't trust our people to take cases to the United Nations Human Rights Committee.
No. Well, of course, there are virtually no NGOs in Jersey. There's nobody speaking with knowledge. I haven't found a Jersey lawyer yet who describes themselves as a human rights lawyer. Presumably anybody can describe themselves as a human rights lawyer.
I always ask, actually, what I say is that every criminal lawyer is a human rights lawyer. Because, when you're doing criminal defense, that's the right to a fair trial and your right to personal liberty and your right not to be subjected to torture or inhuman or degrading treatment. So I would say, I practiced as a criminal lawyer for 5 years, and I think that is real human rights work.
It is. Well, being a naive Joe, I think that way, but then that's the sort of the way we are.
I think that's how it is. And I say to my students, if they say, oh, I want to be a human rights lawyer, well, I say you should go and do some criminal law.
Right. Well, of course, it never used to be. There wasn't even a paper on criminal law in Jersey.
Really?
Many years. Yeah, it didn't exist. So you couldn't study it, I mean, it's really, and there's an oath which Jersey lawyers have to, for the first 15 years of their career, they have to represent the poor and the widows and all this stuff. But what happens now is, because some of these cases can be quite time consuming, the big firms, if they get allotted a case, if they've got a lawyer who's 15 years, they will sell it to somebody else. In other words, they will pay another lawyer, a lawyer to do it for them. This is how it goes on. So there's sort of a vague legal aid scheme going on, but it's very, very inadequate. And of course, the lawyers control it. Poor old Joe have got no say in it. Equal force of arms. You know, it doesn't mean anything, does it? If you've got money, you've got access to whatever the best you can afford. It's just not fair, is it? There's a human rights issue in that alone, I would have thought, if you haven't got equality of arms. But that's...
By the way, I'm interested to know that the firm I was working for in Jersey was Baker and Partners.
All right, he's a very known lawyer. I mean, he made a most lasting condemnation of the system here during the Curtis Warren case.
Yeah.
And I asked him if he'd discuss it outside. Oh, no, he wouldn't discuss it. But he was saying how they were failing in the human rights context. Now, Baker, he's a very senior lawyer.
That's right. Yeah. It was extremely interesting, I must say. My first experience with Jersey.
Was it? Yes. Well, we better stop, and I will see whether I've managed to salvage this recording, but I hope that I can come. I hope it stimulates a bit of interest. I hope we can come back to you at some point.
No, anytime, whenever it's good.
Okay, you're in lockdown, so you can't escape. What happens to your cases now back in the court? Do they do that?
So they're now doing it with video.
Right.
It's really complicated. So, and I was just, I'm the chair of the British Russian Legal Association.
Right.
So we had an online seminar last week with lawyers from Moscow and London and Cyprus about how, under conditions of lockdown, the courts are dealing with cases through video links and that kind of thing. Very, very interesting how the different countries are coping.
Well, of course, again, public access to hear the hearings. This is one of the discussions. It's at a level that's taking place here. That people might want to go and hear the relatives. They might want to see what happens to them, but at the moment, not allowed in the court. So these things are very serious. I mean, the case that I went along to, which was an international trust case, they threw me out. So they're not very keen on people hearing some cases at the best of times. Now they've got the golden opportunity, haven't we? We've got lockdown, we can throw you out anywhere. We're not allowed in here as a health issue, even if it takes place in the court, even if there is a hearing. So it's a grand opportunity if you want to close down things, isn't it?
Well, and that's a worrying aspect, isn't it?
It certainly is. And there is discussion on it, but not a lot of discussion going on here based upon the actual human rights implications, I'm afraid. It's complicated, isn't it? We need guys like you to explain it to. The conference will take place. The Jersey Conference on Human Rights will take place. You will do your opening speech.
I like nothing better than explaining it.
Good. I shall stop now. Anything else you want to say?
Okay.
Finish?
If you're happy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I could go on and on and on, but, I've noticed with my audience, 3 minutes is about as much as they can take,
There you go.